So a few weeks ago, I was sitting by my desk, trying to outline all my different ideas as to prepare for my talk today. I could talk about my work as a legal advisor, but also as a mentor for young women who have experienced mental abuse, social control, cultural control, but also religious control. I could also talk about how I voluntarily give legal advice and educate the minority about discrimination and hate crimes here in Denmark. Or the experience from being a public debater, heavily active in debates about integration of the Muslim minority. So there I sat, with all my posts, all my public speeches, and all my notes from my work. And I felt frustrated. So my better half came in, and he asked, "Listen, what's your purpose?" I said, "I have so many." And then he asked, "Okay, if you could send a message from the past to your future daughter, what would it be? Or in other words, what would you say to the parents in your minority if you wanted to change the future of the young girls?" I have so many young women coming to me, asking me to help them flee from their families. If I could drag a red line through all my cases, all the women that I have met, there is one thing that repeats itself. It's the lack of communication between the parents and the young women. I have had, as I said, so many young women asking me to flee, asking me to help them flee from their parents. This has been the hardest part of my job, because I know from my own experience that the transformation that awaits them is troubling hard. These young women come from a culture where collectivism is very strong. When we teach our young daughters in Denmark or in the West about independency, we teach them out of the view of individualism. In the Muslim culture, we teach our daughters to tie her father's shoes, her mother's shoes, her siblings' shoes, and at the end, her own. So, independency in our culture is judged by a woman's willingness to sacrifice, to give, and to carry out her closest through life. Yeah, beautiful family values are born out of this view. But the problem is that this view often crashes with the view of independence here in the West. To balance between these two points of views is very hard for a lot of young women. When these young women flee from home, they experience a huge amount of loneliness, a transformation that shocks them and throws them back to the same structures that they actually fled from. An often repeated example is that when the young woman lives at home under her parents' roof, she lives a double life, one inside and another outside. She has a relationship with a young man that she fell in love with and keeps it secretly going until her parents become aware of it. When they do, they demand that she breaks up with him. This often escalates in violence. In some cases, mediating between the parents and the daughter is successful. But this is sadly rare. So why daughters? Why not sons? Because women raise men. In Denmark, half of the residents in women's shelters are women with another ethnic background. That doesn't mean that ethnic Danish men cannot be abusive or violent, but it means, or it shows us, that there's a huge lack of support in the minority itself. I have chosen to send 4 different messages to my generation of parents in the minority. 4 important but easily overseen or poorly communicated subjects that are all dominant dilemmas and challenges that young women feel are tabooed when speaking to their parents. I have 4 dilemmas that I would speak with my own daughter if I had one. identity, sexuality, religion, and the choice of her partner. So on to the first, identity. When it comes to identity, many young women with Muslim background experience putting on two different identities. It is important that you as a parent talk to your daughter openly about this struggle without dictating her to choose a side. If I had a daughter, I would tell her that the search of a solid identity is eternal. The generation shift is a natural transition of change, which requires rebellion. She will perceive priorities differently than my generation. I would tell her that I also was in great imbalance. I would tell her about the time that I went to the local library when I was very young, where I found my own little world in the Department of Philosophy. In that section where you could find the books of the world's greatest thinkers. Far away from all the books were the answers, but close to all the books were the questions. Over the years, I was often interrupted in my own search. And with these interruptions, I doubted the process of questions. I would understand her when she feels that I don't really get her world. The only thing that I would ask of my daughter, if I had one, would at least to be to visit this section from time to time and open these books of questions and be brave enough to ask the important questions. Why? Because then I could be calm as a parent and know that if someone in the future offers her a magic blue pill, then she will be brave enough to ask what's in it and what will it do to me. In the minority, we teach our children about all the big answers through religion and different ideologies. We forget to teach them to ask questions. And this is the biggest self-defense out there in the reality. So on to the second subject, sexuality. Sexuality is heavily connected to shame in our environment. When it comes to women from the Muslim minority, sexuality is still seen as something very private. You can see that to this day, I even find it hard to talk about my own sexuality. That is because I have a constant whisper in my head telling me that I am not a sexual being. I am someone who is obligated to satisfy my partner's sexual needs. This is my function. If I had a daughter, I would tell her that the world would tell her to keep calm, keep low, dictate her to be elegantly invisible. I would talk with her about all the different standards that are at least 1,000 years old, and all the demands of having no flaws, like the billboard illusions of the perfect body. I would tell her that she will be dragged and strangled by different ideas, that some will tell her to cover up from top to toe, and others will tell her to get nude. As her parent, it is my duty to make sure that she is left with the freedom of choice, the freedom to define her own sexual expression. I have met young women from many years ago who until this day still lives in heterosexual marriages, but who have LGBT backgrounds. I have met young women who don't even know what their sexual needs are. They become victims of extreme willingness to satisfy others' needs before their own. If I had a daughter, I would tell her I don't really care what her sexuality is, just as long as she stays truthful to herself. If you don't talk to your daughter openly about her sexuality, then you are playing odds with the reality outside your home. She will explore her sexuality whether you want it or not. Then on to the third subject, religion, the big elephant in the room. The third thing that I would talk to my daughter about is her religious identity. I would tell my daughter that I also went on my journey searching my own identity. What a rocky road. I would tell her that her mother fled as a child from Afghanistan, a country often mentioned when discussing the fight against terrorism. How I had to search my religious identity between two different worlds, one based on security and peace, the other left in war and dust. One used as a prominent example on equal rights between the sexes, the other used as a prominent example of the most dangerous country for women. I would remind her of her roots, that behind all the dust from the many wars in Afghanistan, there are fairy tales of poetic literature and a long tradition of rebellious thinkers in Afghanistan's history. I would educate her, like her grandfather educated her mother. I would tell her how he opened his heavy books of spiritual poems about the religious journey through life. You see, he was religious in his own way. He used to say, he still says, that all religions are an insult to God's greatness. I would tell her, on the other hand, about her grandmother, who was a practicing Muslim and prayed 5 times a day, but never really doubted. If I had a daughter, I would tell her that both her grandparents were loving and compassionate people, even though they didn't really agree about the importance of religion in this life. I would pull up my sleeve and recite the one quote that her grandfather kept repeating when I felt lost under my journey. The Muslim Sufi poet Maulana Jalaluddin Balkh, as you probably know as Rumi. He wrote, "Yak hazar sal ta Musalman, yak hazar sal ta insaniyat," which means 1,000 years to become a Muslim, and then 1,000 years to humanity. I would pull up my other sleeve and recite the quote that her grandmother used to tell her mother when she felt lost. "Bishnaw az nay chun hikayat mekonad, az judaiya shikayat mekonad." Listen to this reed, how it is wailing, of separations it is complaining. So between these two poems, I grew up. I grew up between a poem about becoming human before you attach yourself to any belief, and a poem about this flute in pain because someone chopped its body off its trunk. I would give her the freedom to choose for herself, whether if she wants to be an atheist, agnostic, or believe in a creator. That is her choice. On the fourth and final subject, the choice of a partner. If I had a daughter, I would tell her that her mother fought for many years against violence against women, because her mother was born and grew up in a world where violence were legitimate. That there came a day where her mother couldn't even recognize her own face because of the heavy bruising from violence. Yeah. She fell in love with a young man who, just like her, never really knew a world of nonviolence. Then I would tell her about that time where I met her father. What a great universe that was to be introduced to. This universe where I can stand here today and guarantee my future daughter her utmost freedom while her father is sitting amongst the audience. And a bit proud because the idea of this talk was actually his. You see, me and her father had 2 different backgrounds when we met each other. 2 different ethnical backgrounds, but also 2 different beliefs. When I met him, I had lost my trust in love and the strength of love. But I learned that love can unite 2 different parts, 2 different beliefs. In a world like today, this is important. So if I had a daughter, I would teach my daughter to believe in the strength of love and how it can unite. I would, of course, tell her that the choice of her partner is her free choice. This is the most important subject. We have women who have gotten killed because they chose differently. Every single day, we have women who flee from their family because they choose differently. I come from a country where women are killed every single day because they choose differently. So what is my action? What is my call to action? Dear parents, go home, talk to your daughters, and guarantee them this open environment where they can come to you and talk openly about important aspects of life. Help me spread this message, this call to action, to the corners of the world, so that my job is no longer to help young women flee from their families. Help me change the future of the next generation of young women in my minority, where they won't lack support if they choose differently. The freedom of choice, let's invest in that, in our daughters. Thank you.